Hello, I'm Sarabeth Berk, and welcome to my series on becoming more than your job title. This has been a really interesting exploration where I share stories of individuals who are figuring out what do you do? How do you really answer who you are in your work? Because it's not simple anymore. We're not just experts and generalists. That binary description is what makes people feel like they're stuck in a box. And really, what I found by talking to more professionals is people who wear a lot of hats can work at the intersection of that, meaning they're blending and integrating those hats together. And I call that type of professional identity being a hybrid. And that's what I've been studying and researching. So, hybrid professionals are an option. People can actually work between their identities, and that's where their unique value and expertise, their hybrid expertise, starts to emerge. It's a very interesting and different way to talk about who you are because you can make sense of why you do so many things. My guest today is Rebecca Block, and she has a very interesting background starting in education as a professor, and yet she's moved between education, innovation, and research. And so today she's still sort of seeing how can she apply and do things that are combining those three different areas together, and she's figuring herself out. So we're going to have a really great conversation understanding where is she in her thinking about her professional identity, especially because she's a researcher. She has all these tools to examine herself and think critically, and she's still struggling figuring out her intersections. And that's why I share these conversations, is so you can hear how real people are challenged and also sorting through what are my intersections? What's my hybridity? How do I communicate that and see my true abilities? So without further ado, I'm going to bring Rebecca up. Hi, Rebecca. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
I'm thrilled you're here. Tell us where we're finding you today.
So right now I live outside the Philadelphia area and work remotely from there for an organization called Springboard Collaborative. That's a nonprofit that works with elementary schools on building literacy and getting all children to reading to grade level by fourth grade.
Amazing. That is such an important effort, the grade level reading and literacy abilities. Well, I know you've been doing a lot of thinking about your professional identity. I think we met at an online conference, and so it's great to have some intimate one-on-one time with you so you can share what's on your mind. And the way I like to kick these off is just, what do you do? How do you answer that question when people ask it to you?
It depends on how tired I'm feeling, right? If I'm feeling pretty tired, I just go, I'm the Senior Director of Innovation and Continuous Improvement at Springboard Collaborative, a literacy organization, right? And I leave it at that because sometimes I don't want to crack open the can of worms that says, and also I do this and have done that, and all the things that I'm sure hybrid professionals run into consistently and can relate to. If I'm feeling like opening up an interesting conversation, then I'll say what I'm doing currently is my full-time position is that. I'll usually also mention that I'm formerly a tenured professor, have my doctoral degree in rhetoric and composition, have run writing centers and tutoring centers, have worked as a VP of evaluation and research at high school focused nonprofit, and have consulted with nonprofits and small business owners across a range of learning questions, right? And so then as soon as all of that opens up, people are really like, but so, like, they don't ask it this way, but usually it's, what's the thread that how, like,
Yes.
you spent all that work getting a PhD and getting tenure, and then you just dropped that? What? Why
Yeah.
would you do that? Doesn't everybody want that kind of job security these days, right? And I know you and I were talking before about, when you're sort of honing in on what is the unique intersection of these different skill sets. And for me, one of the things that I found frustrating being a tenured professor was that it was always an add-on for me to really work at that intersection, right? I was hired for my expertise rather than being hired to be someone who was really good at laterally connecting with people across departments and helping change occur and those types of things. That wasn't what I was hired for. And so I would layer all that on top of my core work, and it became really exhausting because that wasn't what people were looking to me for, but that was what I needed for myself in order to feel like I was really fulfilling on the things that I cared about and could do, and that really gave me energy and meaning. So.
Oh, I love how you just said that last part because it's very symptomatic of people I've found that are hybrids, where in order to feel your most fulfilled, alive, engaged in your job, you've got to use these different parts, flex in, flex out. And a type of role like a professorship isn't really incentivizing that behavior. It's not designed to be that kind of
Right,
job.
exactly.
And so then you're trapped. So what did you decide when you had this epiphany about yourself?
Yeah. So originally I was just like, I could just do more, right? Like I'll just start
Mhm.
consulting. And so started consulting for nonprofits. Because one of the sort of areas, right? I'm still working out very much like how do I articulate the intersection, but one of the areas of strength that I get a lot of energy from and bring a lot to the table with is that I help people I use all my backgrounds in research methods, what from
Mhm.
very quick, more ethnographic, or more qualitative, or even like design research, very light, sort of quick research methods, to way more in depth, requiring large sample size and statistical analysis, right? And sort of a range of research methods in between to help organizations or people when they're going, I'm trying to figure out X, right?
Mhm.
Usually, if you don't want to just say, and the solution's Y, and I'm just going to build it, and I hope it works, right?
Yeah.
You usually want to do some kind of inquiry. You want to do some kind of learning.
Mhm.
And what I realized I was really good at was helping people identify what's the type of learning that is appropriate to the resources you have, the level of rigor
Yes.
of question you have, um, to really get what you need to know as quickly as you can to help you make a meaningful decision and move forward. And so I started by doing consulting and just layering that on to my full-time work. And then as I did that, I had
Mm.
someone recruit me essentially and say, will you please come work for us full time? And
Yeah.
what they had seen was me more in that hybrid space, right? We like that
Right.
you are able to do rigorous research methods, that you're able to collaborate effectively and communicate really well across teams, that you're able to advocate for like getting projects into action and really ensure that those projects move forward. We want you to come do that as a vice president of our organization. And so that was really, it was like, oh, I'm being seen for
Yeah.
more of what it is that I want to do. Let me go to that full-time job instead, which was a big risk because it was moving from a well-established state college where I had tenure to
Yeah.
a startup organization whose future was
Mhm.
not guaranteed. Um, and I think mostly did it because at that point I had a young child, and then sustaining the full-time job plus lots
Yes.
of consulting was just it was just too time consuming. Even though it was enjoyable and energizing, it was too time consuming.
Yeah, there's always that debate of how stretched can you be and where are you putting your time and effort at different stages of your life.
Yeah.
So, how did it feel when this other organization saw you, and how do you think they were able to see your hybridity? I'm just curious about that.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think a unique skill, honestly, of the particular COO at the organization at the time, who I was working with as a consultant initially, is that he just is particularly good at recognizing skill
Mm,
sets in people and where they would be good at something. Um,
okay.
and so and then he ended up moving on into a different organization, and when he left, it was not I was not
Mm,
seen in that way anymore, right? And I had not yet learned how to articulate and advocate for myself to be seen in
right.
that way. And so then it was like, ooh, okay, so I need to get better at understanding and being able to articulate and advocate for this for myself rather than
Mm,
counting on someone else seeing it and being like,
yeah.
oh, you're the right fit for the come do this thing or this project or help with this thing now. So,
That's such a good point. This notion of other people seeing ourselves even more than we see us.
yeah.
And then if that person's no longer in our life, do we still have the capacity to advocate and articulate who we are? And that revelation, you're like, I have to get better at this. This is something I haven't done enough of. So tell me when you first heard or learned about hybridity and what that made you think.
Yeah, so it was interesting. I mean, it was just the other month. But I was, a participant in the Design Ops conference where you were doing a workshop, and I started, poking through all the materials. I think a few weeks in advance, saw some of your stuff. I was like, what is this hybridity stuff that she's talking about? This is interesting to me. I'm curious, right? And so
Yeah.
just curiosity. And as I started to read more, I was like, this really resonates. This
Mm,
feels like it articulates something that I have not been able to articulate
Yeah.
well, right? Of just sort of it. So up until now, you'd noticed in my bio at Springboard Collaborative right now that I use the phrase like I'm at the intersection of. That had occurred to me, right? To sort of talk about the intersection of sort of disciplines or areas that I'm
Yes.
working within. What had not occurred to me was being able to articulate in a single way
Mm.
intersection of hows, right? How is it that okay, so I'm really good at synthesizing. I'm really good at communication that bridges divides. I'm
Yeah.
really good at helping people articulate and understand what they need to learn. And I'm really good at making that practical, like moving anything from theory into practice and from practice back to theory, right? That
Yes.
constant
Right.
circle. But looking at those four things rather than as four separate superpowers, saying, what am I at the intersection of those things? That's what
Yes.
my unique value prop is. It's like, oh gosh, I literally in my design research do all these things about value prop for services and products. And it never occurred to me of like,
Yeah.
oh, that should be
What is it?
applied when you're thinking about yourself. What is your
Completely.
value prop that you're bringing? And what problems is that helping people solve? And how is it right? And
Mm.
it's like that's really appealing. And since then, have tried repeatedly, like you sort of referenced in your intro, of like, okay, one of my superpowers is synthesis, and I am a researcher, and I know how to take disparate data points and turn it into meaning. And gosh, if it isn't still really hard trying to figure out how to articulate what that
So
I love
hard.
about myself. Yeah. If it was
Yes.
anybody else, I think I could do it.
Yes. Maybe we'll just take your name out of the equation and you can pretend you're doing analysis for somebody else. I don't
Right,
know.
exactly. Just like take all the data points and just go through and here's what this result said. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, did you see recently I did a post on 4 parts to validate your professional identity?
Yes. And I
And
started doing all four of those. Yeah.
okay. And so just for people listening, the 4 questions are how do you see yourself? How do others see you? So that's internal and external validation. And then the other 2 questions are when are you in the flow? And what are your areas of best expertise? And so that's the conscious and unconscious states of being. And so when you can map those 4 areas together, it's another Venn diagram to see your core professional identity. It's like, who are you across those? And then that can help you hopefully open up into your hybridity. And I think that how do I see myself can be really challenging, right? And you had told me you had asked other people how they see you, and you got all these paragraphs of data back from them, which was helpful and unhelpful because you're like, what now what?
Yeah, exactly. Well, and one of the things that is definitely not one of my strengths, although I would love for it to be, is um, titling, right? So like, so
Mm,
not, when every time I've published articles, I've published poetry, I've published novels, every single one of them, I've had to get someone else to help me with the title because I can do all the stuff,
yeah,
but then, oh, what's the title? I don't know, right? And so that's definitely one of the things is that as all these folks, gave
yeah,
wonderful, rich data it was also so meaningful like that. I particularly
yes.
appreciated that suggestion from your material, like check in with how other people, what are the strengths
Mhm.
that worked with me, what are the strengths that you see that I'm uniquely bringing to
Yeah,
our work together when we work together was so and it's such a like gracious gift that you realize people are willing to give you
yes.
stop and take a
Mhm.
moment to think thoughtfully and articulate
Yeah.
that and like that in and of itself was worth it from that simple
Oh,
even if it didn't go any further. It's just like to realize wow, people see me and they're seeing things that I don't necessarily see about myself.
yes.
That's such a gift. And they're seeing things I do see about myself. And it's a gift to realize that, like, okay, I'm not making that up. There's not a fiction in my imagination.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think it's a version of a 360, and I had to go through one of those in a prior job, and it was my first time. It was a very methodical process, certain number of like internal coworkers and second degree coworkers. It had this whole like, way to get your sample set. And it was nerve wracking, but also revealing. It was a little too quantitative. That one, it was like a lot of scales with some, open ended questions. But I think the process of professional identity exploration, there's some ways where you can say, like one word do people use to describe my identity? And then, to explain that further can be more the open-ended response. But I think you and I could play with some amazing measurement tool. And just to kind of plant this seed, I'm actually developing the beginning of a how hybrid are you measurement, because I
Mm,
realized different people are different levels of hybrid professionals.
right.
Some people are slightly hybrid, meaning the intersectionality is less, or the difference between their primary identities is not as disparate, right? There's less diversity. Like if you're a storyteller and communicator, Those are kind of similar in,
Right.
in vein, but people that have more disparateness and more time in their intersections or more overlap in the intersections, these are all indicators of very hybridized individuals,
Right.
which makes them even more obscure and defiant of norms and labels. And I think these are things I'm trying to help people see so we can understand ourselves. Like these are tools I don't see existing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's really interesting. I will certainly be curious to check it out when you've got it. Both the researcher in me and the like
Yes.
individual trying to get further with understanding things. I'm curious for
But
the
I
both.
want to come back to you and your intersections because I'm forgetting a little bit the question I just had in my mind. But you were saying you were struggling understanding your own intersectionality. And so I'd love to talk about that a little bit more. And you specifically said titling is hard for you. And that's so fair because that's kind of the branding piece of what do you call yourself in the intersections? I name that your hybrid title. Mine is being a creative disruptor. And you're right, it took me a while to find that language and to feel good with it because
Right.
it's naming it and then owning it is the two sides. So,
Yeah.
what I'm curious about for you is how comfortable are you with the discovery of the different themes and words that are emerging in your intersection? And then can you work with a friend to start doing that kind of, I call it professional identity math. It's
Right.
the creative word math side of it. So where are you in your comfort level?
Yeah, that's a great idea actually, because I'm just thinking like, oh, why don't I go back to the same friend that used to help me type my poems and novels, right? She's
Right.
she's better with the creative piece of it because I remember actually in your workshop, and I don't think you were directing at me, but I certainly heard the connection where you were asking people different things, and I had put like on LinkedIn I still use the phrase learning advisor, which I don't love, and you would reference like yeah, there's this difference between um, branding and blanding, right? And
Mm.
yeah, no, I'm definitely feeling like learning advisor is in the blanding
Yeah.
that spectrum. Like it does not capture anything that makes anyone want to ask a question
Mm.
or understand more about what
Yeah.
that particularly means. So I think where I am in terms of like comfort, right, is I think in terms of the sort of predominant areas, and then you talked, I think, in the workshop about having sort of secondary
Yeah.
areas that are kind of like their complements or not, right? So in terms of the predominant skills, right, I think synthesizer was one of the biggest ones that came up that I had identified, seen in myself, that I've
Right.
seen that I'm in a flow state in, and that came up across every single one of the pieces of feedback that I got from people. Something that essentially amounted to either they use that word or amounted to you're really good at on the spot in conversations or within written documents
Yeah.
seeing what the points of connection are that other people aren't seeing between all the ideas that are being expressed, pulling
Yes.
it together and saying it back to people. And I think the second one that's interesting for me there, so some people are like, oh, you're an excellent communicator.
Mm.
That's there, but I don't know how much of it is actually just the overlap of synthesize, right? So it's like I'm synthesizing it, seeing the ideas, then I'm putting it in communication
Right.
and I'm bridging divides, right? So I don't know
Mm.
whether it's caretaking or bridger, or I don't have a word for that one yet because it's
Yeah.
all of them feel a little off to me.
Right.
Something about one of the things that came up from multiple people, and that I've also noticed that I tend to do all the time, whether it's consciously requested or not,
Mm.
is that when people are disagreeing, or there's even they're not disagreeing on the surface, but there's like lots of tension in the room or in the document or whatever. What I'm doing is using the communication and synthesis to bridge the divide, right? That's
Mm.
happening, and how many people cited like we were stuck on XYZ thing, and it was just because we were just like, well, there's two camps, or there's three camps, or there's four
Right.
camps, right?
Right.
We don't agree, and you
Yeah.
realized what the thing was that actually we did all share by putting it in a different way, seeing the connections, and then that you allowed us to bridge that divide and work together.
Mm.
And then the fourth piece is this like movement then from, okay, so great, here's where we all are aligned in principle.
Right.
Now let's get into what does that mean in terms of tactics, right? What are the next steps? Or that if everybody is lost in tactics and it's going in a lot of different directions, that I'm the one that usually goes, let's pull back to the why. What's the
Yes.
principle that's important here? What is it that we're trying? What's the result we're trying to achieve? What
Mhm.
matters? And so that movement of like wherever you are, if you're stuck in theory or if you're stuck in practice,
Yes.
pulling it into the whole was the other
Mm.
thing that consistently came up from other folks and from
Sure.
me reflecting and thinking about where I'm in flow.
Well,
And there's like some secondary ones that have to do
yeah.
with creativity and artistry. I do a lot of like artistic stuff. And then humor was a thing that
Mm.
like, you're the funniest person I know to work with. Like, makes
Wow.
me laugh whenever we're in the midst of some really annoying project, and it gives me energy to keep going, right?
That's
Uh,
huge.
So yeah, that's the like mixture of things, but the intersection of them is where I'm still struggling,
Yes.
especially pulling in that like movement from theory to practice or from vision to tactics
Yes.
back, right? It's like I can see where the communication, synthesis, and caretaking all come together in a particular way of being with people,
Right.
live in facilitating, in the way that I coach one on one, in the way that I consult with people, all of that. But that movement back and forth between, theory and practice or vision and
Yeah.
tactics, I'm having trouble like figuring out where does that.
Mm.
I know that that's part of the intersection. I just don't know how to articulate it. So
Oof. I love just how you were able to describe all of the sense making and internalizing and just looking at the thematics of you, and grouping them, because that is like the first part, is just like getting clear on one of the buckets aside from the identities, because it's messy. And so I think that's what we're hearing is this process is not clear cut. It's not linear. It's a lot of testing, sensing, and then trying different words. Is it the nurturer, the caretaker, the bridge builder? Like, what is that?
yeah,
I was hearing something about, shared agreements and common ground builder too, because you're finding that common shared understanding between
yeah,
people.
yeah,
Um, and the words that are starting to feel, you have to say them out loud and sort of test it as an identity, like your hybrid identity. And synthesizer does keep kind of coming up again and again as sort of the overarching idea of you. You're
right,
some kind of synthesizer we're
right,
trying to get more
right.
detailed around. Um, yeah, and I love how you said the theory to action, action to theory, and you're able to kind of rotate within that. And the part too about doing it in real time, how you're
Mhm.
able to do this on the spot. And I think just listing those characteristics and qualities as your top 5 or 10 things that you're like, okay, this is the body of energy and ideas that represent me. Then it's finding the new vocabulary and playing with synonyms, metaphors, and analogies. Figurative language can be really powerful too, just to kind of jar us and be like, oh, I'm the mastermind, I'm the puzzle master, what is the analogy for this? So play, yeah.
Yeah,
Have a
yeah.
glass of wine and go talk to your friend are usually my recommendations at that point.
That's cool. I like that. That yeah, switching a little bit out of the analytical mindset, which I think I was very much approaching this in
Yeah.
like researcher analytic mindset and flipping to poet mindset, right? Which I haven't done as often
Yes.
recently. But that
Yeah.
yeah, I appreciate that suggestion. It's a good idea.
No, it's a process. And I think too, it's like word math. I do that a lot with people where it's like sometimes hybrid identities are 2 words that are literally mashed together, like a workologist. I love that one. And then, you stack what are the identities that support. And so that's your researcher probably. And
Right,
I don't know, you've mentioned a couple others at this point. Maybe the synthesizer goes under that and so forth.
right, right.
So mashing words together, adding descriptors, substituting things, that's where synonyms come in. So I've got a few math tools I can send you that handout too.
Yeah, great.
Well, this is very exciting. I really just appreciate that you have such a strong research mind and lens. Because when you and I were talking prior, I was like, it's really rare that I can, have a conversation with someone who's really knowledgeable in quantitative, qualitative practices, ethnography, like grounded theory, you name it. And I think you said earlier, the right tool for the job. You can show up in a situation, help people define problems, and then map the right research tools to it. And so, as you and I are sort of getting meta about professional
Yeah.
identity and mapping research processes to it, it's very fun to have this. So I appreciate that.
It is, yeah, no, it's and I think, as we were also mentioning before, for other folks who are still, sort of working out, like, am I the other thing that I've noticed is how much resistance, I won't speak for other people, how much resistance I've certainly encountered, particularly earlier in my career when I
Mhm.
was, finishing up my PhD and pursuing tenure and people, I don't know if you're familiar with Gay Hendricks' work, The Big Leap,
Yes,
obviously.
yes, zone of genius.
Yeah, yeah, Zone of Genius. And one of the things that always struck me about his work early on, a number of years ago when I read it, was that difference between zone of excellence and zone of genius. The zone of excellence is stuff that you're really good at that doesn't give you energy that other people still count on you for. So you
Yes.
tend to encounter resistance in your life when you go to move away from your zone of excellence and
Yeah.
into more areas that are your zone of genius where you're really good at. People maybe haven't been counting on you, but it energizes you, right? And And he has all those practical
Yeah.
techniques, like how you move more into your zone of genius so you can be healthier and have more energy and blah 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 blah. But the thing that really sticks with me that I wonder is applicable to the hybridity piece as
Yeah.
well, that especially if you have an expert background, if you've developed expertise in something, it's not just you, it's a lot of other people who invested in some way in that expertise of yours.
Mm.
Right? And so there's not because anybody's trying to keep you down, but there's some pressure that can be uncomfortable to move through, and that I think even just unconsciously you can sort of like turn away from
Yes.
even noticing that you're feeling stuck or enclosed or trapped, because other people, especially if you're someone that is sensitive to other people's opinions,
Right.
or tends to want other people to be happy with you. I'm certainly vulnerable to all of those things
Yeah.
myself, and I think women in general are socialized to be more,
Yeah.
those things. And so, yeah, I think that's just one of the things that I wish when I was younger that someone had sort of like encouraged, hey, you don't have to be a thing, right? Like,
Yes.
or that a thing can be an unusual intersection. It does not need to be a sort of pre-existing pathway that like is clear and defined and easy to follow. And you hear all these references now, like, well, it's gig economy and people are just going to have to change careers all the time, and
Mhm.
they're going to have to jump from thing to thing. And even with that, it still implies like you'll be a thing and then another thing and then another thing
Yes.
in sequence, right? And
Mhm.
all the research on multitasking and how much it indicates like how exhausted we get
Yeah.
when we flip from one thing to another. Whereas if it's an integrated, if we are like working
Mhm.
in an integration, that seems like it has so much more potential to be sustaining over the long term. And that's I think part of what was really interesting to me about your work,
Mm.
that potential to respond to the current, reality that we all live in, that you don't get to be a thing anymore, whether you want to or not. You're not going to get to. Uh,
Yeah.
and so I think that's really exciting to me about this, is that idea that like you can still carry who you are if you're really clear on it, of this intersection of things that you do across a number of different roles. I've been an associate professor of English. I've been
Yes.
a vice president of research and evaluation. I've been a senior director of innovation and continuous improvement. Those sound dramatically differently. When you look at my resume, you're like, what?
Exactly.
But I've been doing the same type of synthesizing and researching and bridge building, regardless of which one of those roles that I was in, right? And that was always what gave me
Yes.
the most energy.
Oh, Rebecca, amazing. And by the way, we have a couple of people watching, Lakshmi and Gary, so I just want to shout out what you said about, people's perceptions and expectations of what we're supposed to be, or they've invested in you, and then you feel like you'll let them down if you are not that identity. That is one piece of this puzzle. I think we're also in a major generational shift, and all of these accelerations of technology and the workforce, and people, having careers for 40, 50 years and not retiring in their 60s anymore. The entire landscape of work and professional identity is just being demolished. And we're in, I think, the flux of it right now. So the advice you and I probably got from our parents, choose a thing, take a path, those strategies don't exist. It's a very nonlinear world. And so this permission to be multiple things, to follow multiple paths, to let them be very diverse and divergent. But to your point too, there is a thread, because in identity, there are fixed and there are dynamic identities we hold in ourselves. And so even though we're changing, parts are staying the same. And that's, how do we see that when we trace back 5 different jobs that all have different job titles, and people are like, how are these connected? Who are you? And to me, that's really the bigger picture of what this work is that integration of, when do you stop and take inventory of what you've been doing and actually reconcile who are you really, and see the integrated pieces that lock it all together, so you can hold on to a sense of yourself and you have permission to name yourself regardless of these situations, context, jobs, employers, clients. I've consistently shown up as X, and I can own that and feel good about it. So you just really explained something I've been playing with, and I appreciate that you see it too.
Yeah, it's really exciting, and it's, I think the other thing that I would just say for people is like, it's also really helpful for thinking about what sectors you want to be in. So when
Yeah.
I hit a moment where I was like, should I go back into academia?
Mm.
When I knew that I wasn't gonna be able to stay at the place that I was at, and I was talking with someone who was worked on the government side, but as an advisor, like government connection with colleges and universities. And he looked at my resume, didn't know me, but just looked at my resume. I explained some things that I did, a little bit about projects I've been most proud of. And he was like, you are too much of a change maker to go back
Mhm.
into an academic setting. You will not be happy there because academic institutions are the most bureaucratic besides really established large governmental institutions, and you'll be frustrated constantly. That's what I see throughout your entire life. Over and over again, you came in and created a change within the place you were
Mhm.
in. And I was like, that's really helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you
Yes.
for that insight.
Rebecca, add that to your list, the change maker. That's a
Yeah,
core theme that needs to go.
it's not. Yeah, that wasn't on there. That's a good point. All
And
right.
to people listening, I really recommend making this word bank. I call it your professional identity, like keyword list, because these ideas that are surfacing as we're discussing your identity, the more you hold on to them, it's like this master directory of words and labels that are unique to you and you resonate with. And then you can map them into, okay, does that go in my bio? Does it go in my title? You can plug and play, but you suddenly have the 10 or 20 keywords that you're like, that's a word I need to hold on
Yeah,
to.
yeah, yeah. I
Well,
appreciate.
we are about out of time, but I've really enjoyed this. I know I'm going to be following up with you in the future to just go deeper and also hear what you've discovered about yourself. Is there anything else you want to share today about your hybridity or final thoughts about what you're learning?
No, just really fun talking with you today, Sarah Beth. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Oh, the pleasure is mine because I just get to bring this out to more people to hear. And if people want to follow you, I think it's go to your LinkedIn, Rebecca Block on LinkedIn. She's got all kinds of resources and she is consulting and working with organizations. So follow up with her if you need some great support in change making research, whatever people are doing out there.
Yeah, yeah.
And likewise, More Than My Title is where people can find me and the book and all kinds of good handouts and courses. So I am just sorry that we've got to end, but I really enjoyed it. Rebecca, thank you so much.
Thank you.